Hey, everybody, this is Eric Mishi, Executive Director of SAVE, Suicide Awareness, Voices of Education. And this entire week, we're having conversations with folks that are leading organizations that are focused on suicide prevention, as well as talking with people who are suicide loss survivors, folks who have been empowered to try to change lives through the work that they're doing with any number of different communities. We're thrilled to be able to do this all week long with some incredible people. And I am delighted to be able to be here today with Jaymes Black, who is the CEO of the Trevor Project. Hey, Jaymes, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad we finally got a chance to meet in person. You and I have had, well, we haven't been in person,
This is kind
virtually.
This is
kind of in person. In this day and age, it's kind of in person. SAVE, along with the Trevor Project and some other organizations, are members of a group called the National Council for Suicide Prevention. But we'll get together in person in October in New York. But in the meantime, Jaymes, introduce yourself to folks that are watching.
Sure. My name is Jaymes Black, as Eric said, and I use she, they, and he pronouns. I am a mother of 10-year-old twin boys. I'm a wife. We've been together, married 18 years. And I live in the DC area with my wife and kids. And, I'm a former LGBTQ plus youth who struggled with suicidal ideation, who struggled with mental health. And now I have this incredible blessing and opportunity to lead an organization like Trevor, to give back to my younger self and the youth today who are still experiencing what I experienced 30 something years ago.
So you came to this role from the private sector, is that right?
Well, I was with an organization, a nonprofit before this called Family Equality. And I did move from the private sector in 2021 after 20 something years. And I pivoted to nonprofit. And it really was about giving back to the LGBTQ plus community. Family Equality was about removing barriers for LGBTQ plus people who want to have children. My wife and I adopted our boys. And so we knew what that struggle was like. And so Family Equality afforded me that opportunity to help people who were trying to create their families.
Okay. Well, so you've been in this role now officially 2 months?
63 days, but who's counting?
Who's counting? Nobody's paying attention. So in those 63 days, what have you come to learn that you maybe didn't know about the Trevor Project and the work that it's doing?
I think I've come to understand that there is when you hear about the Trevor Project, there's a instant connection that people have. There is, I call it a magic that you feel when you hear about this life-saving, life-changing work that the Trevor Project is doing. And I thought I understood it. And not until you're on the inside of the Trevor Project to see its inner workings and what all of the folks do, 500 plus people do day in and day out to save our youth, to move them through some very dire situations. You don't understand that until you're here. And so what I understood before is that, wow, this is impressive work. And now what I understand is that these folks are saving lives and changing lives. And it takes a special person, as you know, Eric, you're in this field too, to do this work. And I'm just grateful to be around those sort of people who have decided to say, you know what, this is how I want to spend my life and my time is to help youth in their mental health.
Yeah, I've been in this role for a little over a year, and so I come into this role not as an expert in the area of the subject matter of suicide, but very quickly having been in the nonprofit world for a fair amount of time, you really do get a sense of the determination and the passion and the commitment that people in this space have, and rightfully so, because we're talking about trying to save people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So as we talk about that with the Trevor Project in particular, the numbers and data and statistics around the impact of mental illness and suicidal ideation and suicide with the LGBTQ plus youth community are pretty alarming. And so as you look at those numbers and data, what are the types of things that you're hoping to try to accomplish, in your first year or so as the new leader of this great organization?
Yeah. First I want to say, you mentioned the data, and I want to just impress upon people that LGBTQ plus youth have unique challenges, right? They're not inherently suicidal. They're suicidal due to the treatment that they receive from society. So when we think about some of the unique challenges, it's higher risk of bullying, harassment, higher family rejection, stigma. When we think about the anti-LGBTQ plus bills that have been introduced across the country that affect our youth. And those are unique challenges that affect our LGBTQ plus youth. Oftentimes people ask me, so what's different? And so you sort of have to break that down. What I want to accomplish is understanding what can we do to create partnerships across the aisle. And I mean that across the political aisle, because this should not be a partisan issue. Saving lives should not. I feel like as a country, we have a moral imperative to protect our children, especially the most vulnerable. So how can we create stronger partnerships across the aisle, not make this a partisan issue, so we can be there for our youth? I want to increase our level of impact and the number of youth that we reach. And that is really my goal, is to how do we ensure that every single youth understands that Trevor is there for them in one way or the other, whether they are in a crisis situation or whether they are not in a crisis situation, whether they call the 988 line or they call our classic line. And, in addition to that, I think our prevention work is really important. So how do we ensure that they don't get to the crisis stage? So another goal is our public education, which is under our prevention arm, and ensuring that we are out there training more institutions on how they interact with LGBTQ plus youth. If they're coming out or they're having a hard time, if they're experiencing family rejection, that cultural competency is really important. And it really can, I think, sort of be the difference, right? When a youth reaches out to a adult that they hope is supportive.
Yeah, we live in a country that is polarized on just about everything. The biggest issues, the most minor issues. And I think for those of us who spent much of their careers in the public sector, in the public policy space, there's a frustration that there ought to be some consensus that who we are as people, right, just based on who we are as human beings, shouldn't be a proxy fight for anybody in the political realm. And so we're in the midst of another national election cycle where, again, the polarization is clearly obvious on every side. It doesn't really matter what side you're on. So how do you deal with that in this environment, and how do you make people understand that these kind of basic human rights that we all ought to be able to enjoy and appreciate as Americans really ought not to be cannon fodder in the middle of the political cycle?
Yeah. I've had the most success, I'll say, in that area by telling the stories of real youth who are experiencing issues. Youth who are having to move from, say, states like Texas to safer states like Maryland and Colorado. Some people believe that the challenges that and what Trevor supports, that we are in some way exaggerating. It's not that bad. Until you can sit them down and tell the stories of youth who want to take their lives, the youth or the parents who have to move their children from one place to another. I think storytelling and telling what is happening from a human perspective is really important. The stats are really important. They're alarming, but connecting that to the real stories of the youth that we talk to and chat with day in and day out. I'll say something else. When you think about how polarized we are, and our youth are worried. So, we have our peer support group, our peer support platform, rather, Trevor Space, for youth who are not in crisis. And, what we've discovered there is that youth are talking about the political landscape. They're talking about the what ifs. They're talking about how do they ensure that they always have support. I think those are important sentiments to share across both aisles, to say our youth are really worried, and what they should be worried about is being a child. And as you know, Eric, it's hard enough being a child. It's hard enough being a teenager.
Yeah.
It is hard enough. We want them to worry about being children. We want them to spend their cognitive energy on learning, not on worrying about their safety. And those are the types of stories and conversations that we have to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you look at that, and even going beyond the election year and going beyond kind of politics, where do you see kind of hopeful opportunities to change hearts and minds here and to create more allies and advocates for people who, who may say, there's nobody in my universe or my network or my community, that comes from the LGBTQ plus youth community. What are some of the hopeful, optimistic things that you see out there, and what are the types of things that Trevor's doing to take advantage of those hopeful signs?
Mm-hmm. I would say the opportunities are one for us, and I say us, the collective we who do this work day in and day out, is to not assume that people who don't understand us are against us.
Right.
Really, it is about understanding, to your point, that they don't think they know anyone in their lives who may be LGBTQ plus, or any youth in their lives who are suffering. Sometimes we tend to think, well, those folks are automatically against us. They're not. They just have not been, they haven't been convinced, or you have to have a conversation with them. So I think that's really important. I think the other opportunity that I've seen is there's a plethora of straight parents who have LGBTQ plus youth, and they never thought that they would be in this situation, and they have become really strong allies. And I think it's important to have those allies, because they can walk into rooms and have conversations that I may not be able to be to have. And so they've been sort of these unlikely, allies. And I think that's really important for us to leverage that. And the way that we bring them along is, one, providing them the supports that they need, providing them the platforms. Many parents are asking us, what do? They don't know how to support their children. And so we provide them with data and support, and obviously support for their kids. But it really is around understanding that most folks are not against us. We just need to have the conversations. But straight parents really have become these just strong allies for us. And I think getting more straight allies is really important, because most of them just want to understand. But on a lot of sides, when you mess with somebody's kids, they immediately become an ally. And so we've had, conversations. I've had many conversations with some of those folks, and they are an important part of the fight and of our future.
I tell people that, my first kind of engagement and experience with suicide, the subject matter suicide, took place. It's now, I was going to say 44 years ago. It's 45 years ago. It tells you how old I am. Was in a very small town in called Fairmount, North Dakota, which was a population of about 400 people. And my 16-year-old friend Alan died by suicide. Mm-hmm. And at that time, 45 years ago, there was no conversation about suicide. There was no conversation about, how do you help a family who was struggling with that. 45 years later, that landscape is significantly different, significantly better. It's certainly not perfect. We still find ourselves dealing with that stigma that's attached to suicide. But, that's where clearly and obviously is kids, young people who are from the LGBTQ plus community have that added extra burden that isn't just associated with mental health, mental illness, and suicide, but also, who they are as a human being.
Yeah.
And so as you think of where it is we can continue to make improvements in breaking down those barriers and stigma, and obviously you mentioned, getting straight parents as allies mm-hmm. in this fight, where do the schools fit in? Where does the faith mm-hmm. community fit in? Where does the media fit into all of this?
Yeah. I guess what I'll say is systemic barriers are really where I think the majority of the change is going to happen. Obviously, we have an infrastructure. We're part of the infrastructure that's been built to support youth and to support LGBTQ plus youth. But we have to strengthen that infrastructure with the folks who interact with kids day in and day out. I think where the faith community comes in, I was part of the faith community when I was younger, and that was part of why I experienced so much rejection. I think where the schools come in is having Trevor as a support system. When I think about public education, we will go into schools and have conversations with folks. When I think about folks of faith, I had someone approach me about 2 months ago after a panel I was on to say that she was a person of faith and her child is LGBTQ plus, and how could she become an ally to speak out? I think people of faith need to hear from other people of faith to know, you know what, it is just fine. It is okay. And I think we need to make stronger partnerships, faith-based partnerships as well, so we can show a cohesive collective that support LGBTQ plus folks and youth. Where Trevor comes in is being a voice and not being afraid to go into those spaces. We will have conversations, again, across the aisle, across the faith aisle, political aisle, all of those things. And that's where we come in, is having those conversations, going into those schools, being proactive with our prevention work, and really being a voice and an amplifier of the issues that our youth are experiencing. I don't think we can have any barriers of who, if we're going to fix this, we can't have any barriers of who we're going to speak to and who we're going to talk to and who we're going to work with. If we're going to create systemic change, we have to be willing to bust the doors open and talk to every single, organization, every person, institution that our youth have to interact with day in and day out.
Yeah, I think that's critically important, because you're not going to get a dialogue going on unless you're willing to go to those places where those dialogue and that conversation may be the most difficult, because that's really the place where there's the greatest opportunity to make change. Going and talking to the same people who kind of have the same position that you do, right, is kind of singing to the choir, and those folks are already in the band. And so now it's a question of, how do we get some other folks to be a part of that? How do we get them involved? So talk a little bit about one or two of the programs of Trevor Project that you're looking at right now that you want people who may be watching this to maybe go on your website and take a particular look at, particular focus on, that you think is particularly important to the work that you're doing right now.
Sure, absolutely. I want to go back really quick though about the busting down the doors and going into these areas where we have to create change, where possibly we are sort of the unlikely areas. I want to just talk about it from a geographical perspective too, rural areas. And we know that many LGBTQ plus youth in rural areas are suffering. And so we are really excited about a grant that we just received from the Helmsley Foundation to do work in the Midwest, where we know that there is a high rate of suicidal ideation among those youth. So I also think about, when we think about sort of going into these spaces, we have to think about it from a geographical perspective as well, right? We can't go to the New Yorks all the time and the LA and all those progressive areas, to your point about talking to the folks who are in the choir. We got to get down to the rural areas, to rural Texas, to rural Louisiana, all those places. We have to be and doing research, right, around why those places are important. When I think about the programs that I would like people to check out on our website, or to understand more, one, I would say I'm going to keep going back to prevention and public education. We have to do more around cultural competency in terms of how people interact and speak to and help and support our youth. So public education is a big one. The other I'll say is our research. And our research, we have a very talented research department. Our research is, as you've probably quoted some of it, it's in depth. It's quoted in the media very often. And if you need some type of data, some type of validation, some type of information to share with people as you're having these conversations, or just to help yourself, I think our research is really strong, and it's a really great area to start to educate yourself, to educate others as well.
Yeah, so one of the things, so I've got on scrolling on the bottom here, is your 2024 survey, national survey on LGBTQ and plus young people, where some of the data, it says over 39% LGBTQ plus young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. 46% of transgender and non-binary young people, and more than 1 in 10, 12% of that entire community attempted suicide in the past. And that 50% of LGBTQ plus young people who wanted mental health care in the past were not able to get it. That particular issue in and of itself is troubling. So how do we deal with that piece of this issue where people who need to get mental health care are able to get that?
I mean, I think it goes back to the systemic barriers. That is a systemic issue, Eric. That is a doctor or a psychologist or a therapist not understanding the needs of an LGBTQ plus youth. I would love to see Trevor evolve into an organization that's not just going into schools, but is going into other industries to have conversations with people, to help them understand. I think this all comes from, one, we know discrimination is a big thing, but I think sometimes they don't know what to look for. They don't understand how to have the conversation. They're uncomfortable about it. I would like to see us evolve into an organization that has conversations with doctors, that has conversations with people in the medical field. And we are heading that way. I think medical associations are another other sort of institution that we can start having conversations with, and using the training that we've used for sort of the public sphere and taking it into them to say, this is what you need to know. And again, I think it's about being proactive, seeing that data, Eric. That means that we need to act on it. So what do we do to fix it? It's great to have it. It's great to share it with folks. It's great for the media to quote it. So now what do we do with it? We action it, and we proactive, and we go and start having conversations with those folks. That's how we start to build a stronger infrastructure for mental health for LGBTQ plus youth.
So kind of in the last, kind of as we kind of come the last few minutes here of our conversation, you know, you and I come from backgrounds where we would be considered activists, right? We've been involved in the public debate. We've been involved in institutions that have impact on public policy. So in a lot of ways, it becomes kind of second nature to us to get out there, to use our voices, to be advocate. You know, most people, that doesn't come naturally to them, right? That's not, you know, that's just not something that they're used to doing. So yeah. How do we find that place where we can get folks who want to have a voice, who want to be being part of that change, who want to be change agents, and what kind of advice do you give to them about how do they get involved, and how can they speak up, how can they make change, and not be content, or not necessarily not to be content, sit on the sideline, but to get past the fear and the discomfort of going out there and being seen and being heard? Yeah.
Well, I would say that change of this magnitude, or maybe any change, comes with discomfort. I don't think there's any change that does not come with discomfort. So first, you have to establish that within yourself and your value set, that if you want to see real change, that there's going to be some discomfort. I also think that it's important for us to open the doors to them and make it, you know, what folks like you and I, right, who do this for a living, is to open doors and have, you know, safe places for people to have those conversations. Change does not always have to be you're an activist or that you're having conversations like this. Change could be that I feel strongly about this, and now I'm having conversations at my church. Now I'm, you know, tapping my, you know, my relative on the shoulder to say, that's not the way you address a trans youth. You know, now I'm having conversations with my mother and father about how they addressed my cousin who happens to be LGBTQ plus. Change is on a spectrum, and I think that people can make change in many ways. And sometimes people believe it has to be the big change. We need change, you know, at the grassroots level, you know, on the ground. We need change at the policy level. So I think telling people what change means and educating them that it doesn't have to be a big thing. You can do it in your day-to-day life. I also think from our organization, if people feel so compelled, is to volunteer. That could be another way where you're not out in the public sphere, you know, sort of yelling into a microphone, but you're on the phone day in and day out talking with an LGBTQ plus youth. That, I think, in itself is how you create change. And then I think that inspires you to go have conversations at the dinner table with your family about what you saw, and how do you know that you can't change hearts and minds just that way. And so I think doing that, and I also think people who host a community event, if speaking into the mic and sort of being in the public sphere is not your thing, it doesn't have to be. But if you want to host a community event so folks like you and me can come talk about the work, that's another way to create change. So I just want people to know that there's a myriad of ways to create change, and it's on a spectrum, and you can, from the smallest conversations, but that one conversation can have a rippling effect. One quick story I'll say is that my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, for a very long time, did not support their daughter and our marriage for a very long time. And once he got to know us and see the stories or hear our story of our family, et cetera, this really strong, uber Christian person, made a change. And then that led to conversations with his family, another family. So I say that to say that at the family level, at the friend level, you can have those conversations, and it is a rippling effect.
Yeah, I think that well put. So this entire week, as I said, we're having conversations with people about a whole range of issues. When we're done with this conversation, we've got Deb Stone with the CDC talking about the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. We started off our conversation this morning talking about the construction industry, which has got a high rate of suicide as an occupation. And so I want to kind of end this conversation on a hopeful note, because when it's all said and done, that's really what we're all about, is bringing hope to people. So as you think about the next 63 days of your time as CEO of the Trevor Project, what is the thing that you find to be most hopeful?
What I find most hopeful is that even though that we are in this polarized political climate, that what I hear and what I know and what I see is that we have support across the aisle. And that really provides a sense of hope that people understand that this work and our youth are not about being political pawns. It really is about saving their lives. That gives me hope for the future and what we can do. And I think the other thing that gives me hope is hearing how vocal our youth are. They are more vocal than I ever was at this age, and them and their vocal, their voices and their strength inspire us to do more, and we have to be there for them. And I think they push us to be better. The adults in the room, they push us to be better. They push us to do more. And so we hear from them. I think the youth voices are a really important part of this work. They are our most important stakeholder, if you will. So the fact that we have bipartisan support on these issues, and have in the past, and I feel that we will in the future, gives me hope that we can keep going and we can keep evolving and we can keep reaching more youth.
Jaymes, it has been a pleasure for this past half hour here or so to chat with you. I can't wait to sit down with you in person and get to meet you. Continue to do the important work that you're doing, the Trevor Project doing. We're proud to be able to collaborate, partner with you.
Can't wait to meet you in person, and so proud to collaborate with you as well, Eric.
Have a great day.
All
Thanks.
Right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.